Praxis 5435 Study Guide. Mastering the Scientific Methodology Section Preparation Quiz. Question 1. A student is studying the basic structure of the atom and learns about the nucleus, protons, neutrons, and electrons. A common phrase used to describe atoms is that they are mostly empty space. The student asks for an explanation of what this means. Which of the following explanations best answers this question? Is it? Option A. The nucleus of an atom is incredibly small and dense compared to the overall size of the atom. The electrons orbit the nucleus at relatively enormous distances. The vast volume between the tiny nucleus and the orbiting electrons is essentially empty space. B. The empty space is actually filled with a hypothetical substance called ether, which scientists in the 19th century proposed as the medium for light waves. C. This is a common misconception. Atoms are not mostly empty space. They are solid particles, and the empty space model is just an analogy to explain electron energy levels. Or D. The electrons themselves are spread out so thinly and move so incredibly fast that they appear to fill the space, but the space between the nucleus and the electron cloud is not truly empty. The correct answer is A. This question addresses a fundamental concept from Rutherford's gold foil experiment, which revolutionized the model of the atom. Prior to this experiment, the plum pudding model suggested atoms were a diffuse sphere of positive charge with electrons embedded. Rutherford's experiment showed that most alpha particles pass straight through a thin gold foil, but a tiny fraction were deflected at large angles. This could only be explained if the atom's positive charge and most of its mass were concentrated in an extremely tiny, dense nucleus, with the rest of the atom being mostly empty space. The diameter of the nucleus is about 100,000 times smaller than the diameter of the entire atom. If the nucleus were the size of a marble, the electron orbits would be over a kilometer away. The volume in between is indeed empty. Option A correctly explains this. Option B mentions the discredited ether. Option C is incorrect. It is not a misconception. Option D is a more nuanced view of electron probability clouds, but does not contradict the fact that the space is mostly empty. Question 2. A student is studying the classification of organisms and learns that scientists use a hierarchical system from domain down to species. The student is given 4 organisms: a house cat, Felis catus, a mountain lion, Felis concolor, a domestic dog, Canis familiaris, and a gray wolf, Canis lupus. Based on their genus names, which of the following statements about the evolutionary relationships among these organisms is correct? Is it? Option A. The house cat and mountain lion are more closely related to each other than either is to the dog or wolf, because they share the same genus Felis. B. The house cat and domestic dog are more closely related, because they are both common domesticated pets. C. The mountain lion and gray wolf are more closely related, because they are both wild animals that live in similar habitats. Or D. All 4 are equally related because they are all mammals and belong to the same class, Mammalia. The correct answer is A. This question tests the understanding of taxonomic classification and what the genus level indicates about relatedness. In biological classification, organisms that share the same genus are more closely related to each other than to organisms in different genera within the same family. This is because the genus represents a group of species that have descended from a relatively recent common ancestor. Felis catus and Felis concolor share the genus Felis, indicating a close evolutionary relationship. Option A correctly identifies this. Option B incorrectly groups by domestication status, which is not a taxonomic relationship. Option C incorrectly groups by habitat and lifestyle. Option D is incorrect because while they are all mammals, the genus level signifies a closer relationship within that broader class. Understanding taxonomy helps scientists communicate about evolutionary history and make predictions about shared characteristics. Question 3. A student is studying the human digestive system and learns about the harsh chemical environment of the stomach, which produces hydrochloric acid and the protein-digesting enzyme pepsin. The student asks a logical question. Why does the stomach not digest itself, given that it is made of protein and bathed in these strong digestive agents? Which of the following best explains the primary protective mechanism? Is it? Option A. The cells of the stomach lining are made of a special type of protein that is completely resistant to the action of pepsin and acid. B. The stomach lining secretes a thick, alkaline mucus layer that coats the epithelial cells, physically protecting them from the acid and preventing pepsin from reaching the cell surfaces. C. The acid and pepsin are only secreted and activated when food is physically present in the stomach. When the stomach is empty, these substances are not produced, so no digestion can occur. Or D. The stomach lining cells divide and regenerate so rapidly, every few days, that any minor damage from the acid is repaired almost instantly, preventing any significant self-digestion. The correct answer is B. This question addresses a common and important physiological puzzle. The stomach employs several protective mechanisms, but the primary and first line of defense is the gastric mucosal barrier. Specialized epithelial cells called mucus cells secrete a thick, viscous, alkaline mucus. This mucus layer coats the stomach lining, creating a physical barrier. Its alkalinity helps to neutralize the acid that diffuses through it, and its viscous nature physically prevents the large pepsin enzyme molecules from reaching the underlying cells. Option A is incorrect. The stomach lining is not made of a special resistant protein. Option B correctly identifies the mucus layer as the primary defense. Option C is incorrect. Acid and pepsinogen are secreted in anticipation of food. Option D describes a repair mechanism, which is important but secondary to the continuous protective barrier of mucus. Remember, we can take your Praxis 5435 exam for you remotely and undetected with 150 score guaranteed. Message us via the number in the bio. Question 4. A student is conducting an experiment to test the effect of different types of fertilizers on plant growth. The student plants bean seeds in 4 pots filled with identical potting soil. Pot A receives no fertilizer and serves as the control. Pot B receives a standard chemical fertilizer. Pot C receives organic compost. Pot D receives both the chemical fertilizer and the organic compost. All pots receive the same amount of water and are placed in the same location to ensure equal light. After 4 weeks, the student measures the height of the plants. The results show that the plants in Pot D are the tallest, followed by Pot B, then Pot C, with Pot A having the shortest plants. The student concludes that using both fertilizers together is the best strategy for maximizing plant growth. Which of the following questions about the experimental design should the student consider before accepting this conclusion? Is it? Option A. Were all the seeds used in the experiment from the same seed packet and of similar size and initial viability? B. Was the total amount of nutrients added to each pot standardized? And could the enhanced growth in Pot D be simply due to a higher total nutrient input, rather than a synergistic effect between the two fertilizers? C. Was the pH of the soil measured before and after the experiment to ensure it remained within the optimal range for bean growth? Or D. Were the pots rotated daily to ensure that any minor variations in light or temperature in the room were averaged out? The correct answer is B. This question requires a critical evaluation of experimental design and the identification of a potential confounding variable. The student's conclusion that there is a synergistic effect from combining the fertilizers may be premature. The key flaw is that the treatment in Pot D received a higher total quantity of nutrients than either Pot B or Pot C individually. It is possible that the greater growth in Pot D is simply due to receiving more total fertilizer, not because the two types work together in a special way. To properly test for a synergistic effect, the experiment would need to control for total nutrient input. For example, the student could use half the recommended dose of chemical fertilizer and half the recommended dose of compost in Pot D, so that the total nutrient level is comparable to the full doses in Pots B and C. Option A addresses seed variability, which is important but not the primary flaw. Option B correctly identifies the issue of different nutrient quantities. Options C and D address other important controls, but are not the most direct criticism of the stated conclusion. Question 5. A student is studying the water cycle and understands the processes of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. The student asks a thoughtful question. If water constantly evaporates from the oceans, why does it not just accumulate in the atmosphere as an ever-thickening layer of vapor? Which of the following explanations best answers this question using principles of physics? Is it? Option A. The atmosphere has a limited capacity to hold water vapor, and this capacity is highly dependent on temperature. When warm, moist air rises and cools, it reaches its saturation point, or dew point. The excess water vapor then condenses into tiny liquid droplets, forming clouds, which can eventually lead to precipitation. B. Water vapor is actually heavier than the dry air mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, so gravity constantly pulls it back down to the Earth's surface, which is why it rains. C. The rotation of the Earth creates a centrifugal force that flings water vapor back towards the surface, preventing its indefinite accumulation in the upper atmosphere. Or D. The process of transpiration from plants releases so much water vapor that it balances the amount evaporating from the oceans, creating a steady state. The correct answer is A. This question addresses the physical principles governing the water cycle. The key concept is that air has a maximum capacity for water vapor, which is determined by its temperature. Warm air can hold much more water vapor than cold air. As warm, moist air rises in the atmosphere, it expands and cools. If it cools to a temperature below its dew point, the air becomes saturated. The excess water vapor can no longer remain as a gas and must condense into tiny liquid droplets, forming clouds. When these droplets grow large enough, they fall as precipitation. This cycle of rising, cooling, and condensing prevents the indefinite buildup of water vapor. Option A correctly explains this process. Option B is incorrect. Water vapor is less dense than dry air. Option C introduces an incorrect force. Option D describes a component of the cycle, but does not explain the physical limitation on water vapor accumulation. How many did you score out of 5? Let us know in the comments below. Also, tell us which exam we should cover next. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe for more.